My name is Nuri Mercer. I'm 28, a first lieutenant in the United States Army. My grandmother was an Army nurse. No medals, no records. She lived poor, died the same way. A small house on the east side of Richmond, a vegetable garden, hand-brewed coffee, and nothing in the bank. That's what everybody believed. At Arlington, it was just me. No family, no flowers, except mine. 80 white headstones of nurses standing in rows. Then a four-star general walked up and shook my hand. "Fly to Geneva," he said. "Give them your grandmother's name. They'll understand." What I found there, 12,247 lives saved, and a secret my grandmother carried to her grave, turned my family inside out. Please like and subscribe. Drop a comment with your location. I love knowing where you're listening from. Let me take you back to the morning my grandmother died. The call came at 5:47 a.m. Ruth Mercer had passed in the night, peacefully, no pain. My grandmother lived in a small house on the east side of Richmond, creaking hardwood floors, a vegetable garden she tended every morning, hand-brewed coffee that soaked into the curtains. The house was worth less than my sister's engagement ring. Nobody in my family thought that was strange. I did. She raised me on one phrase I heard so often it became the rhythm of my childhood. Discipline is kindness, Nuri. Kindness to your future self. It was the reason I enlisted, the reason I made it. Through 18 months in a combat zone, stitching soldiers back together while mortar rounds shook the ground, everything steady about me started with her. I called my mother first. Diane picked up on the fourth ring. "Well," she said, "she lived a long life. Let me know about the arrangements." That was it. No tears, no silence that meant grief was too heavy for words. Just a transaction. I called my sister Brooke next. Voicemail. I left a message. She wouldn't return for 3 days. That evening, I drove to the house and let myself in with the key she'd given me when I was 16. I sat at her kitchen table and opened drawers I never had reason to open before. In the nightstand, tucked behind a Bible and a tin of peppermints, I found a yellowed envelope, hand written across the front. Arlington, Section 21. Inside was a military ID card, faded and cracked at the edges. The rank read, Captain. She never told me she was a captain. Arlington National Cemetery in March is a place that makes you forget how to breathe. Rows of white headstones stretching toward the horizon like a conversation the living aren't part of. The sky was low and gray. Frost clung to the grass. Section 21, the nurses section, a portion of the cemetery where military nurses are buried, going back more than a century. My grandmother earned her place among them, and I hadn't even known her rank. My mother didn't come. "I have a closing this afternoon, Nuri. You understand?" Brooke had a wedding tasting. Chad, her fiancé, apparently couldn't reschedule either, so it was just me, a chaplain with kind eyes, and a 7-person honor guard. They folded the flag with movements so precise it hurt to watch. The chaplain said a prayer. The rifles cracked 3 times across the stillness. When it was over, the honor guard left. The chaplain placed a hand on my shoulder and walked away. I stood alone with the sound of wind through bare branches. Then I heard footsteps on wet grass. A man in his 70s approached from the East Road. He wore a Class A uniform, crisp, dark green, brass gleaming even under overcast sky. 4 stars on each shoulder. I recognized the weight of that rank before I processed anything else. He stopped in front of me and extended his hand. I took it. "Your grandmother saved more lives than most generals I've known," he said. His voice was deep and steady, the kind you'd follow into anything. "I'm James Calloway. I served with Ruth a long time ago." He looked at the headstone, then back at me. "Fly to Geneva," he said. "Give her sign, never sign, asti, shine in austis. Now give them your grandmother's name. They'll understand." He pressed a business card into my palm and walked away before I could ask what he meant. I drove back to Richmond with the business card on the passenger seat, and a question I couldn't put down. That night, I told my mother about the general. She laughed, not cruelly, dismissively, which was worse. "Some old man playing soldier at a cemetery," Diane said. "Don't waste money flying to Europe, Nuri. You're a lieutenant, not a millionaire." The way she said lieutenant, like it was a consolation prize. I'd deployed to a combat zone. I'd held a 19-year-old private's hand while he bled out waiting for medevac. But to my mother, my service was just a career that didn't come with a corner office. Brooke called the next day. One question. Did Grandma leave anything valuable, like in the house? I hung up and opened my laptop. I searched every military database I had access to. Army Nurse Corps rosters, Vietnam-era deployment records, awards registers. Nothing came up under Ruth Mercer beyond standard service documentation. No medals. No commendations. But a 4-star general doesn't show up to a stranger's burial. Not without a reason that outweighs his schedule. I picked up the phone and dialed the number on the card. General Calloway answered on the second ring. Ruth served under me in Vietnam, he said. Field Hospital Pleiku, 1969. She was the best surgical nurse I ever commanded. What did she do after the war? He paused. You need to see it for yourself. Go to Geneva. There's a foundation near Lake Leman. Give them her name. He wouldn't say more. I stared at the phone for a long time after he hung up. The last thing my grandmother would have wanted was for me to ignore a 4-star general's direct guidance. I used leave days and savings to buy the ticket. 9 hours, Dulles to Geneva. My mother's reaction was predictable. You're throwing away rent money on a wild goose chase, Diane said. Your grandmother lived in a shack, Nuri. There's nothing in Geneva for us. I packed light. The yellowed envelope from the nightstand, the faded captain's ID card, and a small leather notebook I'd found in the house. Filled with handwriting I recognized as my grandmother's. Some pages were in shorthand I couldn't read. The flight was long enough to doubt everything. Maybe Diane was right. Maybe Calloway was sentimental. Maybe Geneva would be a dead end. Then the taxi dropped me at a stone building near Lake Leman. Old European architecture, ivy on the walls, a brass plaque by the door I couldn't read from the car. Inside, the lobby smelled like lemon polish and old paper. A woman behind a mahogany reception desk looked up. Your name? Nuri Mercer. A pause. The woman's fingers stopped moving over her keyboard. And your grandmother's name? Ruth Mercer. Something shifted behind her eyes. She picked up the phone, spoke quietly in French, and set it down. 1 moment, please. 2 minutes passed. A door opened at the far end of the hall. A woman in her late 60s stepped out. Silver hair, gray suit, posture that suggested decades of boardrooms and precision. She crossed the lobby with the measured pace of someone who didn't waste motion. She stopped in front of me and extended her hand. Ms. Mercer, we've been expecting you. She held my grip a beat longer than protocol required. Your grandmother made arrangements. Please come inside. I followed her down a corridor lined with framed photographs. I didn't have time to read them, and I understood that whatever waited at the end of this hallway was going to change everything. Her name was Margaret Linden, 68 years old, trust attorney. She'd managed my grandmother's affairs for more than 2 decades, and the way she spoke about Ruth with precision, but also reverence, told me this wasn't a routine client relationship. The conference room had a long walnut table and windows overlooking the lake. Margaret set a leather binder in front of me and opened it to the first page. 22 years ago, she said, your grandmother established an irrevocable charitable trust through this foundation. It was funded by royalties from a patent she co-developed, a field surgical technique for treating blast wound hemorrhaging. The United States military adopted it in the late 1980s. I stared at her. The current value of the trust is $12,400,000. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the table. The trust's sole purpose is to provide financial assistance to veterans facing hardship, surgical procedures, vocational training, housing, emergency support. Over 22 years, it has served 247 individuals. Every case is documented. She turned the binder to a section of records, names, dates, dollar amounts, photographs of men and women I'd never met. Each one with a story that started in a foxhole or a field hospital and ended with a second chance. Your grandmother designated you as successor trustee, Margaret said. You and only you will oversee the trust going forward. Why me? I asked. Margaret paused. Then she reached into the binder and removed a sealed envelope. My name was on the front, my grandmother's handwriting unmistakable. She left this for you. She specifically excluded all other family members from any role in this trust. Margaret met my eyes. Her instructions were very clear, Lieutenant. I held the envelope and felt the weight of $12 million I never knew existed pressing against my chest like a second heartbeat. I opened the letter alone in my hotel room overlooking Lake Lehman. The paper was thin, the same stationery she used for grocery lists and birthday cards. Nothing fancy. That was Ruth Mercer. Her handwriting was steady, no tremor. She'd written this years ago, when her hands were still sure. Nuri, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've met Margaret. I'm sorry I kept this from you. I kept it from everyone. And I'll explain why. Every dollar I kept for myself was a dollar someone in worse shape didn't get. I saw boys, 18, 19 years old, lose their legs, their sight, their minds in places the world forgot about. The VA tried. It wasn't enough. So I built something that could be. Your mother will want this money. Your sister will want this money. They'll tell you I was confused or selfish or that blood comes first. Don't believe them. Blood came first for me too. But some debts aren't paid with money. They're paid with discipline. I chose you because you're the only one who understands that. You chose the army when everyone told you not to. You chose hard over easy. That's all I need to know. Don't break this trust. Don't let anyone turn it into something that serves vanity instead of need. Discipline is kindness, Nuri. Kindness to your future self. I love you. Now go do the work. Grandma. I read it 3 times, cried twice. Then I folded it back into the envelope, washed my face, and called Margaret. I'm honoring every word, I said. I expected nothing less, she said. I landed at Dulles on a Thursday evening. My mother was waiting in my apartment lobby. She'd driven 2 hours from Richmond, which meant she already knew something. Geneva, Diane said, arms crossed. I found your booking confirmation. You left your email logged in. We sat at my kitchen table. I told her the broad truth, the trust, the charitable foundation, my role as successor trustee. I didn't share the letter. Some things belong only to the people they were written for. Diane listened with a stillness I recognized. The same silence she used when calculating commission on a property she wanted badly. How much? She asked. $12 million. Her eyes changed, not wider, sharper, like a lens adjusting. That money belongs to this family, she said. Your grandmother was my mother. It's an irrevocable charitable trust, Mom. It supports wounded veterans. It's not a family inheritance. You're telling me my mother had 12 million and we lived in that dump? And she gave it to strangers? She gave it to people who lost limbs in combat. Diane stood up. Her chair scraped the floor. I grew up embarrassed, Nuri. I lied about where I came from. I wore the same 3 outfits to school because my mother, apparently a millionaire, chose poverty. And you're going to sit here and tell me that money isn't ours? I'm telling you it legally isn't, and morally isn't. Her jaw tightened. Something shifted behind her expression. Not grief, not anger, exactly. Strategy. I'll hire a lawyer, she said quietly. We'll see how irrevocable this trust really is. She picked up her purse and left without saying goodbye. The door didn't slam. Diane never slammed doors. She just closed them in a way that made you feel locked out. Within 48 hours, the campaign began. Diane called every aunt, uncle, and cousin within reach. Her version of the story spread through the family like fire through dry brush. Nuri is hoarding Ruth's fortune. She won't share a penny with her own mother. No mention of the veterans. No mention of the trust being irrevocable. No mention of Ruth's letter or her wishes. Just a 28-year-old lieutenant who was too selfish to help her family. I called General Calloway that evening, told him everything. I've seen families tear apart over less, he said. His voice was calm, the kind of calm that comes from decades of command. Document everything, and don't be alone when they confront you. 2 weeks after Geneva, my mother staged an intervention. She called it a family dinner. It was a tribunal. The location was Diane's dining room in Richmond. Present: Diane, Brooke, Chad, Aunt Vicky, and Uncle Ray. Diane had prepared remarks. She actually had notes on index cards. Ruth was mentally unstable in her later years, she said. She clearly wasn't capable of setting up a trust this size. We believe the paperwork may be compromised. Aunt Vicky nodded. Diane's right. Mom always said Ruth was eccentric. I let them finish. Then I spoke. Grandma set up this trust 22 years ago. She was 60 years old. Her doctors confirmed full cognitive capacity. The trust was reviewed annually by a licensed attorney in Geneva and complies with both Swiss law and U.S. tax code. Diane's index cards trembled slightly. You're 28 years old, a first lieutenant making base pay. You think you can manage $12 million? I'm not managing the money, Mom. I'm protecting its purpose. There's a difference. The purpose should be this family. The purpose is 247 veterans who had no one else. I stood up and folded my napkin. Military habit. I love this family, I said, but I will not apologize for honoring my grandmother's wishes, and I won't pretend that wanting her money is the same as missing her. I drove back to Fort Belvoir in the dark, gripping the wheel hard. The next morning, I woke at 0500 and ran 5 miles on the base track. Running is how I process. By mile 3, I had a plan. I video called Margaret Linden in Geneva. They're threatening legal action, I said. My mother's hired an attorney. Margaret's expression didn't change. She'd been doing this longer than I'd been alive. The trust is irrevocable and administered under Swiss law with full U.S. compliance, she said. Your mother has no legal standing. Any challenge filed in a Virginia court will be dismissed. She sent me a 4-page summary letter, the kind of document that reads like a polite wall of steel. Use it when you need to, she said. And Nouri, your grandmother anticipated this. She told me, Margaret, my daughter will try to take it. That's why I chose Nouri. I spent the next week reaching out to veterans the trust had supported. I needed to understand the full scope of what my grandmother built. Tom Brennan was the first to call back. 62 years old, lost both legs below the knee in combat. The VA covered initial treatment. When he needed advanced prosthetics 3 years later, the funding had dried up. Ruth's trust paid $47,000. Tom was now a master carpenter with his own shop and 3 employees. Your grandmother paid for my legs, Miss Mercer, he said, his voice cracking. She came to my house every year with apple pie. Never told anyone, not even her own family. Brooke's engagement party was in 3 weeks. Diane had already told the social circle that the family recently received a significant inheritance. 3 days before the party, Brooke invited me for coffee. Just us sisters, she said. The cafe was in short pump. She started with tears, real ones probably. This wedding is everything I've dreamed of, she said. Mom and I are drowning in debt. Just a small portion of the trust could cover it. Grandma would have understood. I looked at her across the table. When was the last time you visited Grandma? Her mouth opened, closed. She was in a hospital bed for 3 weeks before she died. Brooke, you didn't come once. I was busy with wedding planning. She was dying. Brooke's jaw set. The tears dried faster than they'd come. She was old and boring, Nouri. She had nothing to offer. She lived in a falling-apart house. But apparently, she had $12 million, and you're sitting on it like a dragon. That money saved 247 veterans' lives, I said. Your wedding budget wouldn't save one. She flinched, then leaned forward. Mom forwarded your email threads about the trust to that reporter. She got them from the laptop. I stared at her. She pulled my private emails. I stood up. Thank you for telling me. The night before the party, I drove to my grandmother's house. I sat at her kitchen table and opened the leather notebook. 247 names in her handwriting, each one a life. Tom Brennan, prosthetics, 2004, $47,000. Sarah Oakes, mortgage, 2011, $22,000. I closed the notebook and pressed it against my chest. My phone buzzed. Text from Callaway. We'll be there by 6. Dress blues. Another buzz. Tom Brennan. Bringing the boys. We're not missing this. Then an email from Diane. Tomorrow I'm setting the record straight. You had your chance, Nuri. I slept in her bed that night. The sheets smelled faintly like lavender. 6:30 p.m., Saturday. 80-plus guests filtered through the doors. White flowers on every table. Brooke and Chad. Champagne tasse ma. I Diane spotted me. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. The toasts began at 7:15. Chad's father went first, then Chad. Then Diane took the microphone. She started soft. I want to thank each of you for being here to celebrate Brooke and Chad. Family is the foundation of everything we do. Applause. Glasses raised. Then the shift. But I also need to address something. Her voice tightened. As many of you know, our family recently lost my mother, Ruth, and after her passing, we discovered she'd left behind a significant fund. The room went still. Unfortunately, my younger daughter, Nuri, has decided to keep it all. $12 million away from her own mother, away from her sister, on a night that should be about love and family. She turned toward my table. 80 pairs of eyes followed. I ask you, is that right? Is that what family means? I felt the weight of judgment from people who didn't know a single fact. I stood up. 3 seconds of silence, long enough for 80 people to hold their breath. Then I walked toward the microphone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The uniform did half the work. The silence did the rest. My grandmother, Ruth Mercer, was a captain in the United States Army Nurse Corps. I let that land. She served in Vietnam, Field Hospital Pleiku, 1969. She worked through mortar fire, treated 14 wounded soldiers in a single night, and took shrapnel in her shoulder. She never stopped. Nobody moved. After the war, she co-developed a surgical technique for treating blast wound hemorrhaging. The United States military adopted it. The patent royalties over 3 decades built a fund. I looked at my mother. That fund, $12,400,000, is an irrevocable charitable trust. It exists for one purpose: to support combat veterans who have nowhere else to turn. In 22 years, it has helped 247 people. I paused. I didn't choose to keep it from my family. My grandmother chose to give it to people who needed it more. She lived in a small house. She wore the same coat for 15 years, because every dollar she didn't spend was a dollar that went to someone who had lost everything. The room was absolutely silent. I have someone here who can tell you more about what that money meant. I turned toward the side of the room. General Calloway? A 4-star general stood up, and the room understood that everything my mother had just said was wrong. James Calloway walked to the front like he was crossing a parade ground, measured steps, 4 stars catching the light. 80 guests went absolutely still. Ladies and gentlemen, I served 38 years in the United States Army, but the bravest person I ever served alongside was Ruth Mercer. He told them about Pleiku, the night of the mortar attack. 14 casualties in 4 hours. Ruth triaging under fire, her shoulder bleeding through gauze she'd taped herself. She turned down the Purple Heart. She said she wasn't the one who was wounded. He stepped aside. Tom Brennan stood up. The room saw his prosthetic legs below his suit trousers. My name is Tom Brennan. Ruth Mercer paid for these legs. The VA couldn't. She could. I have a carpentry shop now. 3 employees, 2 of them veterans. One by one. 5 veterans. 5 lives. 5 debts owed to a woman who died in a house worth $90,000. Someone in the back started clapping, then a table near the window. And the whole room, not polite applause, the kind that comes from the chest. Diane stood frozen. Brooke's face had gone pale. Chad was already outside. The party didn't end. It dissolved. Over 30 minutes, the ballroom emptied. Most guests shook the veterans' hands. Charlotte Hayes approached me. Her notebook was closed. I was invited here to write a different story. but this is the one I'm going to write. Charlotte Hayes published her article 4 days later. The headline read, "The Army Nurse Who Gave $12 million in Silence and the Granddaughter Who Kept Her Promise." It went digital at 6 a.m. By noon, it had been shared more than 50,000 times. My mother's Facebook post was still public. The comment section transformed overnight. Aunt Vicky called Diane. "You told me Ruth was senile," Vicky said. "You lied to me about our own mother." Vicky hung up. Brooke called me, not to demand, to cry. "It's all falling apart," she whispered. "Mom told me Grandma never loved us," Brooke said softly. "I believed her. For 20 years, I believed her." Grandma wrote letters to every veteran she helped. She knew their children's names. She visited Tom every year with apple pie. She never visited us. You never invited her. Diane called me at 1:30 in the morning. Her voice was different. "I grew up in that house, Nuri, with nothing. My mother could have fixed everything and chose not to." Ruth's choice was right. The trust saved 247 lives, but it also cost something. The little girl who grew up in that small house. "I understand why you're angry, Mom," I said, "but I can't undo what Grandma built, and I won't." The following Saturday, I drove to Arlington before dawn. Section 21 was empty. I found Ruth's marker, white marble. Ruth Mercer, Captain, Army Nurse Corps, Vietnam. I placed the Purple Heart at the base. "You earned this, Grandma." That's my story. My grandmother lived like she had nothing because she gave everything to people who had less. My family wanted her money. I chose her mission. Thank you for staying until the end.